Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Well, welcome back to the Rural Scoop, where we dig into the people, ideas, and the stories that are shaping rural education. I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and today we're talking about something that touches every classroom, every hallway, and every community. That's social and emotional learning, or SEL. Joining me is someone who has dedicated her career to helping educators integrate SEL in ways that are authentic, sustainable, and rooted in each school's unique culture. Krista Leh is the Chief Executive Officer of Resonance Ed, a former high school social studies teacher and a nationally recognized consultant who has worked with schools in more than 30 states to transform the way that they approach student and staff well-being. Krista's journey from the classroom to leading SEL initiatives has been shaped by her belief that SEL is not a program. It's who we are each and every day. She brings a wealth of experience to creating practical and community-driven strategies that help educators and leaders thrive, even in the most challenging contexts. So, Krista, welcome to the Rural Scoop. I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this conversation, and I'd really love to begin by hearing about your path from being a high school social studies teacher to becoming the CEO of Resonance Ed. What key experiences or turning points inspired you to pursue this work?
Wow. I think I need to share first that I loved being a high school social studies teacher. I thought I was going to retire. And what by retire, I don't mean like as soon as my time was up. I was envisioning myself being like 85 years old, still excited to work with teenagers. But I had a principal at the time who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He asked me to consider applying for an instructional technology position. We were just thinking about moving one-to-one in some of the classrooms. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not the right person. I got through my master's program not touching technology. I did the research and gave it to somebody else. I don't even know how to do PowerPoint. And he said, but you can learn that piece. You have the ability to connect with people, and that's what we really need. And you can learn everything else. And I've always been somebody who plays it safe, who likes to be secure and doesn't usually take risks. And that was the beginning of a new me, because I didn't want to look back and regret not taking an opportunity and seeing where it went. And so that led me to becoming an instructional coach for curriculum, which I also loved and didn't think I would like at all. So I supported 36 different data teams and a total curriculum realignment. That led me to my work in SEL, led me to help create a student leadership organization at the high school, which led to ASCD. I became an emerging leader back in 2012, and I met this amazing community of like-minded educators who were as passionate as I was about creating opportunities for students. And one of them said to me, you really should apply for a DUC program. No. But it was different people believing and seeing something in me that I didn't see. And so I'm very grateful to people who have been mentors, and I do my best to give back in that way and let people know the brilliance that I see in them.
I love that. You mentioned something that I want to dive into just a little bit deeper, and that was earlier in your career, you served on that student assistance program. So how did that experience shape your understanding of SEL as a preventative rather than a reactive approach?
I always knew that I loved social studies, but I loved the students more. I knew that what my own experience was like being a high school student, and it wasn't always the best of times. I was lost. I was confused. I was surrounded by loving parents and great friends, but I felt alone a lot of the time. And so I couldn't imagine what it must be like to not have those external supports and to be navigating through the world. And sitting on the SAP team for the 6 years that I did, all of the students were referred to the team through and had it funneled through me because I was the facilitator of the team. And just knowing what the students were going through, it was heartbreaking. And they're still showing up every day. They're still giving the best that they can in the moment academically. And yet we weren't always supporting the whole child. It was academics and testing and did you do your homework? And did you take points off because they were absent without an excuse? Like, oh, we need to change the way that we are looking at students coming to us and how we can support them for success after they graduate or after they leave us.
Your vision of SEL is that SEL is not a program. It's who we are every day. So can you talk a little bit about when and why did that philosophy take shape for you?
These are great questions. I think that I saw that there were all of these programs for elementary students and to support them and a lot of resources for the teachers. And the teachers got to see their students for a much longer period of time than what we do at the secondary level. And then on top of that, I was teaching 6 different classes in a 7 class cycle. So I had more students through. And the types of resources that I needed were going to look different than my elementary counterparts. It's also a bit of a stereotype that secondary teachers are a little bit more resistant to having somebody hand us something and say, here's what it needs to look like. And so I really started thinking about what is the best approach for educators and for the students to support them in these really critical life skills that they're going to need beyond us, no matter what they choose to do with their lives.
Right.
And over time, I started refining it and going from a little bit of something like an advisory period or the first part of a Monday is better than nothing. And then the more I started working on it, the more I realized that it actually is everywhere. And if we highlight where it's happening, then it doesn't need to be one more thing. It's how can we really intentionally and explicitly let our students know that they're learning academics and they're focusing on an SEL skill. So at Resonance Ed, we have these 4 pathways. And part of that is foundational upon the fact that teachers really understand what those 40 skills are. They don't need to know all of them, but they need to think about and look at the ones that are most relevant in their classroom and their curriculum and in their instructional practices. And then they also need to think about what are their strengths. And it's not that we shouldn't be proficient in as many as possible, because we should. We need to be modeling this. But there are some that people are super uncomfortable with, like, I don't want to talk about managing emotions, or I don't want to talk about just emotions in general. And that's okay, because there are other skills like executive functioning, planning and organization, and demonstrating curiosity and being able to action plan and look at a problem and pull it apart, or having a growth mindset. And so for us at Res Ed, it's where do you have a strength? Where are your students' needs? Where is there a natural fit? And if we as educators work together collectively, we can all come together to support students. We don't need to do every single skill with every student.
Right.
You need to be purposeful. So just very quickly, let's look at the physical environment, because what's up on the walls, how our furniture is arranged, all of that gives messages to the students, who and what is valued. Then it's in our social interactions. How are we modeling SEL? How are we building relationships with individual students? But then how are we letting students build rapport with each other? So that's all in the social aspect. Then it's in the instructional practices. What skills are students inherently working on, maybe when you have them in groups? or when they're maybe doing a small presentation, or they're working on a really difficult math problem, or they're working together on a science project or a science lab. How can we say, yes, you're learning this academic content, and the process to access that learning and to enhance it is an SEL skill?
Mm.
And the last part is that, and this is my curriculum background, looking at learning targets, looking at the topics, looking at the standards, you can see that there are SEL skills infused right into that language. And so how can we highlight that for our students as well?
Mm. Krista, as the CEO of Resonance Ed, you design SEL audits and you do coaching and you have curriculum services. Could you walk me through what that process looks like, especially when you're working with a rural school?
Yes. So right now I've done work in, let's say, rural Illinois in the Middle Strip. And so it looks different for every school that I work with. And so I originally, when I started putting my ideas together back in 2020, because we were all, at home for a little bit period of time, I'm like, this is what it's going to look like. And then I realized that I can have some really big foundational rocks, but the way that those foundational pieces show up in schools can look different. Mm. So, for instance, I've worked in some schools where they are able to get substitutes for teachers, and we work in small cohorts. That's not the norm for most places. And so I can work with schools within their schedule with smaller groups of teachers, maybe during a planning time or a team meeting or a PLC. And so we can adjust the schedule based on what the school needs and what the teachers have access to without overburdening or stressing out the system. Mm. The other piece that I've been working on too is knowing that we all don't come up with the same amount of information about social emotional learning. So some of us, it's something that's very new. It might be a novice teacher or somebody new to the profession. But for some of us, we've heard this around before, but we're not quite sure what it is. It gets mixed up with a couple other things. So we have different pathways then. So the teachers can decide where they want to start based on what their students need. And we've been able to curate resources and some planning opportunities so the teachers have a sense of agency about where they want to start and what this will look like in their classroom. And then I support them along the way with coaching, some reflective models for them to think about how it went, and based on how it went, what their next step with students would be.
Mm. I'm sure that you found that overwhelm is probably a thing, especially when you're working with some of those teachers you identified as novice or maybe don't have the content expertise in SEL. So with those educators that might feel that overwhelmed by the idea of adding SEL to their responsibilities, how do you help them honor SEL without sacrificing content time, especially if you have a rural district where the resources that they're dealing with already may be stretched?
Yeah, that's another great question. And there are two pieces that really come to mind first. Once we do some activities, I also am very experiential. I have a hard time sitting there just telling people about social emotional. I'd like them to be able to pull apart, to talk to colleagues, and to participate in activities that they can then take into their classroom and do with their students. Mm. So the first is, what actually is SEL? So what are those 5 competencies? What are those skills? And then the next part is that my dear friend, Dr. Lori Stoller, who is the current executive director for Pennsylvania ASCD, it's now called PA EDGE. We collaborated and we created a checklist. And so based on the pathways, there's a set of statements under physical environment, social interactions, instructional practices, and curriculum. And I say to teachers, if you do any of these things on the front or back, just check off that little box. Now, if you've checked off that box, I promise you, you have addressed an SEL skill. You just didn't actually make that connection. So let's take a look at our skills and match up. When I do this, I'm actually honoring the strengths that students have, or I'm providing an opportunity for routines so that it's lowering their stress, or I'm giving them an opportunity to talk about what teamwork actually looks like before we start something. Mm-hmm. So my challenge to teachers then is, you're already doing this. Let's identify where. And my first challenge would be, tell your students what that connection is. And then if there's something on that list you haven't checked yet, maybe try that out and stretch a little bit. The second technique that I would really recommend, I call it backloading SEL. I haven't figured out a better way to call it yet. But anytime the students have done an academic learning or academic activity learning experience, put up some of those skills and say, ask them, which of these skills did you just practice now? And ask them to talk in their small groups. And the most important piece here is tell me what that looked like and sounded like for you. It doesn't have to be the same as everybody else. But now we're asking the students to think about co-defining what these skills look and sound like in the classroom. And I think that's a great way of working with students and not saying, here's what these skills are and this is what you need to do. I think that in every community I've worked in, these skills look a little bit different based on the students, based on the families, based on language and religion and culture, and that's okay. It's how can we come together and have this shared understanding of how it is that we're going to treat one another and how we're going to work towards our learning goals together.
Well, that sounds very powerful, especially when you have that student voice in there. That's a game changer.
It is. And I think it also gives the teacher a lot of insight into the strengths and the gifts and the talents that are at home in the families as well. Because
good point.
Hey, what does the skill look like at home? Okay, awesome. And here it can look the same way. Or here we're going to tweak it just a little bit because we've got 30 of us from different areas. How can we make it work for here in our classroom while we're learning this part of social studies? What was going to work for us, and having students realize that it can look different in different places when there's different goals.
Your work emphasizes tailoring to the school's identity. So in doing that, how do you support, and I'm thinking rural leaders specifically, but really any leaders, in identifying the SEL skills that best reflect their community's values and needs? Just what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I would, again, say there's two different ways of doing this. We do have an audit that we've created also with my friend, Dr. Linda Megger, who is the professor at the College of New Jersey. We went through our doctoral program together at Lehigh. And we've created an audit that is unique to anything else, because you'll find SEL audits out there that look at the outcomes. How did we see students grow? But we also know that it's your inputs that dictate the outcomes. And so we look at what do you have in place that will give you the outcomes that you're looking for, whether it's shifting teacher practice, or if you're looking at shifting the way that students think about themselves and how they communicate with others. So this audit looks at several different pieces. One, there's a cultural piece. What's the foundation? What is our shared vision, our values? What are our roles and responsibilities as we think about integrating social emotional learning? The structural piece, which is generally where people want to jump to, like, let's change the schedule. Let's get a program. We need to start building capacity and understanding before we start thinking about where are we going to integrate this? What's our process? How are we going to look at how it fits into all content areas at all grade levels, and how do they complement and build upon each other? And then the last piece is behavioral, and it's looking at how do we sustain this? How do we have bi-directional communication with community members and caregivers? How are we having communities of practice for educators to talk about what SEL looks like and what's been working? Then we also look at what are the practices of the teachers? And so where is SEL already happening based on these skills? What are the teachers honoring and reinforcing and highlighting already in their classrooms? At the end, we then provide a building level report and a district level report where individual schools can say, oh, we're actually pretty strong here. We've been doing this based on what teachers are saying. Or, oh, we say this is important, but we're not quite where we want to be in terms of capacity of explicit integration. So you have these 40 skills, but we need to start small and think about what is the most important piece. And usually it's school leaders, teacher leaders, admin who come together and think about where do we need to start first. And we start them in that process.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. Based on your experience, and you've worked in more than 30 states, so what are those SEL issues that tend to be most pressing in schools right now? I know that there are some very unique challenges that we have in our world right now as educators. So can you talk a little bit about what shows up?
Sure. Until this past year, I would have definitely said that what consistently shows up is students not being able to manage stressful times and not know how to emotionally regulate. I would still say that has been something that's come up more prevalent, that's not the right word, come up more often. But what I've been seeing this year through an activity that I've done called hexagonal thinking, in every school that I've worked with, at least this year, more and more are saying that they're worried about students being able to think about self-motivation and self-discipline. They're worried about students being able to collaborate with each other. And they're also talking about agency. And it's interesting because in some cases, students have a misunderstanding of what agency is, or even in some of the activities that I've done or asked teachers to do, the teacher said, I want to work on self-discipline with students. But when students were asked to define that, they thought it was about getting in trouble. They thought it was about discipline and not thinking about, wow, this is hard. I'm going to keep pushing through to see where this can go, or I'm going to take a break and come back to it. One of the other pieces that has really risen to the top in this last year is associated with motivation and discipline, and it's students understanding their strengths and what they're bringing to the table. And so students are reporting that they're not seeing as much relevancy. Oh, I'm not good at this. And it might be related to a content skill, but they have other skills that they're bringing to their group, or a new perspective, or a way of being able to facilitate a conversation that they're not seeing is a benefit beyond the academic acquisition.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's been an interesting shift that I've seen in the last year and a half.
Yeah. Let's talk about the educators themselves, especially in rural communities where, they're often wearing many hats, and their time is from the time that they hit the parking lot until the time they leave when the lights are turning off in the parking lot. What are the strategies that can help them build resilience and emotional well-being alongside supporting those students?
Mm-hmm. This is going to sound very cliche, but I absolutely think that you have to schedule in time for yourself. And it's not just one big chunk of time per week. It's where can you get, even if it's 2 minutes at multiple times throughout the day, to have a reset. And it's thinking about that routine that becomes part of your practice. Maybe it's you get in and you keep all of your lights off for 2 or 3 minutes before you open the door and have, welcome everybody in for the day. Or before you are eating your lunch on the run, it's, okay, I'm going to just stand still for 2 minutes, take some deep breaths. I love the benefits of breath work. I'm not one to facilitate that with people, but our breathing helps regulate our entire system. And so just taking a couple minutes, or if you love music, play a song that inspires you. If you love to read, maybe it's poetry or scripture or something that really sets you for the day, an intention. I used to kind of laugh at this idea of not intentions, but of mantras. But I've created one for myself in this last year. And before I go to work with staff and students in professional learning situations, I repeat this to myself. And I think about what do they need me to show up as? And it's not being inauthentic, but I want to give the best version of myself to the students and to the educators that I work with. And I think if we take that minute to be more mindful and think about what do we need to prepare us to be the best version, it might be a cup of coffee, right?
Some days.
For everybody, but it's really being intentional about that and not letting it go, making it a routine part at different times of the day.
Mm. Krista, when it comes to building that collective efficacy that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, especially in rural settings, how do you foster collaboration and co-creation, or how do you suggest that educators do that so that SEL becomes something that's done with you, not done to you?
When we start introducing different skills to students and saying, here is this skill, I have some sheets, and some of them are free off of the website that you can download. So the website is resonanceed.com, and there's 2 E's back to back, so it's a little confusing there. But it's a worksheet that you don't have to give to students all at once. And in fact, I've broken it down, and they can be these 10-minute moves that don't take all class period. Mm-hmm. So maybe one day it's, you know what, we're going to talk about this skill. What does this skill mean to you? Let's talk about that as a class. Then maybe a couple days later, the next day, why is this important for us to think about? Now, what does it look like or sound like in your everyday life? What can it look like and sound like in our class while we're working together? And so you start piecing these together. Then when teachers come together, with your class, you have them talk, and we come up with what could be an anchor chart. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like in practice, and be as specific as possible, even sentence starters as scaffolds for students. And I've also learned from my elementary friends, this is what it doesn't look like, and this is what it's not going to sound like. So it might even be for the next 15 minutes at a secondary level, we are not going to walk around the room and talk to our friends. We're just going to stay in our group, focused on our task, 10 or 15 minutes. And then you can get your teachers together to talk about, well, I worked with this class on what it looked like to take initiative, the courage to take initiative. Or I talked with this class about what empathy meant. And we look to see where there's similarities, where there's some differences, what are some of the questions that come up. And another good friend of mine, Don Sturm, who lives in Illinois, we were talking one day about courage. And there was a painting that I had shown from a school that said, it means never giving up. And he's like, is that true? Should we tell students to never give up? I'm like, that's a great point. And so let's talk with students about when might it be okay to say, I don't know if I should continue this anymore. And this is where the SEL pieces come in that where could we talk and open up the conversation a little bit more to have these different nuances for students when they're ready. The other piece that I work on with staff is that they get into their grade level groups and their content areas, which I know in some rural areas, you might be the only one teaching that content. So you can partner up with different grade levels then, or you can look across grade levels. I think it's really just important to get a clear picture of what is being meant. So we'll talk about what are some skills that you have just naturally talked with students about in the classroom that have nothing to do with your academics. What are the skills that when you have a learning activity, you know are highlighted often in your class? And for me in social studies, that's going to look different than tech ed or family consumer science or ELA, and that's okay. And then when you talk about different topics or standards, where is there a natural fit? And then I create a map for the teacher so they can see what skills are highlighted more than others. And we just have a conversation. Does this represent, how do you feel when you see this map? Are there skills that you thought you should include more? And it's okay. You might say, you know what? I don't think we're going to work on this one as much as this one. Many schools create a portrait of a graduate. And I think that's a great way of narrowing down some of those skills and deciding for your community, what do you really want to ensure that your students feel confident and competent in by the time they leave you, whether it's at elementary or middle school or high school. and really put your emphasis there instead of thinking, oh, I have to do all 40 of these. You get to be the deciders.
So, Krista, looking ahead, what advice would you offer a rural educational leader that was wanting to really sustain SEL culture or build up what they thought might be lacking in their hallways? Not just in bursts, but really through long-term embedded practice. What would you tell them that they needed to be thinking about?
I would go back to the audit and have them think about the pieces around the culture first. And I do have a free version of the audit that is some questions for yes and no, just to spark a conversation. But really thinking about what is my SEL vision for students and for the educators. Let's make sure that we're on the same page with where we want to be, and then think about what is that going to mean for roles and responsibilities for me as admin, for the teachers, and for the students. And if we want our students to grow in certain skills, then as educators, we have to give them explicit, intentional opportunities to work on those and to reflect on it and to keep moving forward. So I'd say, think about the cultural foundation before you jump right into here's a program or here's how we're going to alter everything, whether it be schedules or the days or people's assignments. Really think about how are we building that capacity so that we can sustain. And then I'd say, think big, but start small. Another friend in Denver said that you don't have to do it all right away. Look at what is already going well and celebrate that. And then think of what would be your next step that could help enhance what is already going well, and start thinking about how could you shift those small pieces, those skills forward with students.
And my last question is something that I ask all of my guests. And I know that this might be an unfair question since you don't work rural necessarily, you don't live rural, but I know that you've worked with rural leaders and educators in your travels across the country. So what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually, I moved from Pennsylvania to South Jersey. And my understanding of Jersey is that the South is considered more rural than any of the other regions. There's a lot of cornfields here, different types of corn. So I've been learning, I don't think it's as rural as where I've worked in other states. When I think of rural advantage, you know what I think of? Community. And I don't know if that, but in my experience working in rural schools, there is such a tight-knit sense of community that is joyful to see. People supporting each other, people having each other's backs, knowing who your neighbors are, wanting to support them. And I think that sometimes I've worked in suburban, I've also worked in urban, that gets lost because people feel that they're one of many, or they're very busy, focused on what's happening in their lives, that they're in a rush and not always looking around at who's there. And that, in my experience, has never been a situation that I've had when I've worked in a rural school. It's how can we look out for everybody and have that sense of community and connection?
That's a great answer.
Was that what do people normally say?
That's, relationships and community and knowing your neighbors. I think that that's probably the one that I get most often, is that sense of community. So you're spot on.
Yeah. That's what I feel. That's what I've seen. And a sense of joy, like just that I don't necessarily, and I'm trying to think why, I'm thinking about the areas that I don't know why. I wonder if because living in the Northeast, it's always seen as very busy and hustle and bustle, and like people are, going on to the next thing, like life feels at a faster pace.
Yeah, definitely.
That pressure is not there. So there is an opportunity to really take in the joy, to take in the people around you, and to see their value.
Is there anything before we end that you want to make sure that our listeners know?
Another good question. Yes, that I know that social emotional learning gets politicized a lot. And it really, really is not about the politics. When we look at what are these essential skills that our students need to be successful, regardless of where you fall politically, we can get behind. Over 90% of us can agree on the core set of those skills. And as educators, we're not coming in and telling students how to be or what to be. It's, here are some skills that are important. How can we think about what this means for us collectively? And how can we work together to help you grow to be the best version of yourself? And how can I learn from you to be the best version of myself and support you? So I think that it is very cyclical and not just a top down or a pushing of any one type of being, but it's more about learning from each other and growing together.
Mm-hmm. Very important. Your work is such an important reminder that supporting our students and our staff's well-being is not something that is an add-on. It really is the foundation for everything else that we do in schools. So thank you for joining me today and sharing your journey and your insights and your passion for helping educators create meaningful and sustainable SEL practices.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like it, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to the Rural Scoop wherever you listen to your podcast. Your support helps bring more conversations like this to rural educators and leaders everywhere. And if you want to learn more about Krista's work or connect with her, be sure to visit her at resonanceed.com. At the end of the day, the wellness of our rural students and staff isn't just an educational priority. It truly is a community commitment. And when we care for the hearts and minds of those that we serve, we strengthen the future of our schools and the communities that we call home. So thanks for tuning in. And remember, let's keep leaning into the rural advantage.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning into the rural advantage.